Hey everyone, welcome back to Screenfish. My name is Jolie Levac. I'm taking over the reins from Steve Norton this week, but don't worry, Steve Norton is here with us to take the meeting minutes. I have gathered a group of amazing female minds to talk about women talking. We have Catherine Erskine, Miriam Ibrahim, and Jolie Featherstone. Welcome everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
So
You don't
Get
talk,
writing,
Steve.
Steve.
You just take the notes.
Yeah.
That's from the movie too. At one point he says, I think we should move on. And they're like,
You don't talk.
don't you answer our questions.
Too funny. So as mentioned, we are going to be discussing women talking today. This is from award-winning director and writer Sarah Polley. She not only directed this film, but she wrote the screenplay as well. It's starring Claire Foy, Jessie Buckley, Frances McDormand, Rooney Mara, among many others. Women Talking is about an isolated religious colony where it's revealed that a shocking secret about the men. For years, the men have been drugging and raping the women. The truth comes out, and the women talk about their new situation and what they're going to do next to move forward. Really, I just want to start by asking what you all thought of this film.
I'm happy to go first. I thought it was exceptionally well done, and for the book, the film basically takes place almost in its entirety with a bunch of women in a barn talking, and so in our current fast-paced world of what we usually consume in terms of media, that's kind of slow, but it was so engrossing that I wasn't missing any of the wow that comes from most of the stuff we usually watch.
Mm-hmm. I did find it actually very stage play vibes. You can usually tell if something is based off a stage play, it's very central to one location. This wasn't, but I bet it could be. And I would love to see that.
Is it adapted from a play?
From a novel.
From a novel, okay.
Yeah.
I would love to see it done as a play because, yeah, that one room aspect was really great. I honestly didn't even really notice until halfway through the film, and I turned to the person I was watching it with and was like, there's literally only one set in this, and it's so engrossing and so fascinating that you would never have known. You feel like you're in it with them and you're there as an observer. I loved it. I thought it was so well done.
And just to give credit, the novel is by Miriam Taves.
I need to read it.
And is based on true events. So while it is a fictional account, it is based on true events.
I actually looked into that and I was like, okay, because you know how the movies can say based on true events and then go like eons into a different direction. I was looking into it and it was actually a group of Mennonites that I believe are called the Manitoba Mennonites group.
Mm-hmm.
They were out in a similar situation where the men were actually doing this, and a journalist went and interviewed them about it. And so I think from the based on true events, that's exactly where it came from, is that this was occurring and the men were doing this in a colony and putting it off as they said, ghosts and other things, and it came out and it was a really big story. So that's pretty interesting too.
I was shocked how recent this was.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I realized that, somebody said 2010 in the film, and I thought we were decades in the past here. And so it was really, I mean, obviously the entire thing is very sobering, but even more so when you hear that it is based on true events and it was in such recent past. It's unbelievable to think about.
Yeah.
Jolie, what did you think about it?
Oh, I'm echoing everyone else. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was so well done, and then as has been mentioned, to be able to take something that is purely set very, very largely in one location amongst one group of people, talking about a very, you know, intense and very like disturbing themes, and making tough decisions for something in our day and age that is almost subversive in its storytelling to tell a story in that way. I thought that Sarah Polley did an amazing job adapting it. I'm actually wearing my Sarah Polley shirt.
Yay!
So it was, I thought she did an excellent job adapting it. I'm a fan of Miriam Taves, and although unfortunately I hadn't read Women Talking, I'd read some of her other books, and I really loved her voice. I thought she has such a unique voice. So to be able to have the source work be written by an author who I really admire, then adapted by a director whom I really admire, and then brought to life by an incredible cast, it really, I think, is very deserving of all the accolades that it's gotten.
Certainly. Steve, what about you?
I'm just here to make notes.
We
Perfect, right.
No, I was very impressed with it. Mainly because, like you said, most of it is in one room.
Mhm.
Like it feels like a play, and this is the gender conversation that may spark from the sentence I'm about to say, because it reminded me of 12 Angry Men. And I'm not saying it's about 12 angry women, but that was what 12 Angry Men was. It was about a jury deliberating what's true and what isn't, and they were stuck in this room until they could come to a decision. And even the fact that it's 12 angry men and women talking, it's like that alone is pregnant with meaning, no pun intended. I'm just going to get myself into trouble in this one. I know what's going to happen. But no, I thought the script was really well deserving of the Oscar that it got, because this is a script movie. This is a dialogue heavy driven, and for a film to remain in, again, it's not quite one location, but it is. Like it's certainly all on the compound, but it's not all entirely up in that barn. But to have such compelling dialogue from start to finish, I thought it was very, very well done.
Oh, the dialogue, the script was incredible. All I did throughout the entire movie, I was just writing down these quotes. I mean, the one-liners were beautiful and powerful. It was constant. Steve, I kind of want to take the word that you said there, anger. Let's work with that, because I loved watching, I wouldn't say I loved watching, I was very intrigued by watching the different women and their different trauma responses, how they all dealt with what they had gone through. We heard that somebody in the colony, a woman in the colony, had committed suicide. Some women become very somber. Some of them become very angry. Some of them want revenge. Some of them are scared. Some of them are angry. It's fascinating to see. Some of them have vices. The smoking. There was a whole conversation around the smoking, about the anxiety attacks, things like that. I would love to hear what you guys thought about the way that was portrayed, the different trauma responses.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go, you go.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, I think that is I think that's part of the beauty of the story, and again, a testament to the screenplay itself, because there's so much backstory. There's an entire history that we don't really see on screen. We do get snippets, we get some like flashback scenes, but really we have to learn about these characters and their histories and what they've been through, very much through the screenplay itself. And then as you said, Jules, like then learning how they've sort of coped with this constant abuse and trauma that's been inflicted upon them. I personally thought it was really interesting to see kind of the dichotomy between Claire Foy and Jessie Buckley's character, that are to me seem like the almost foils of each other in a way, but really they have gone through very similar harrowing experiences, but externally have very different reactions to them. And yet we know that all of these women have a very rich inner life, and sort of their innermost thoughts are not always divulged. And this is kind of the first, or maybe one of the first meaningful experiences or opportunities that they've had to vocalize that among each other. So yeah, I thought it was handled with care and with respect in the screenplay, which I think was really important. But also just all the heavy lifting the screenplay and the actors had to do for us to really understand and care about that history, and then in turn their present kind of trauma responses and coping mechanisms that have come about because of that history.
Mm-hmm. And I like that you use the word vocalizing, because for a lot of them, this was the first time they've really spoken about it.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't even like a word for what they were experiencing. These women couldn't read or write. They were very I guess very sheltered in this colony, and they half of them didn't even, I guess, know for quite some time that this was wrong and this shouldn't be happening, because it was just so standard. So it was fascinating to see them all come into a room and start to talk about it. And then that's when you sort of start to see their responses to this trauma come to light.
Especially because I thought it was really real. Like, I would say the diversity of trauma response just was a really good connection into reality. Because remember that this had been happening for years, and the community was gaslighting them. Oh, it's ghosts. Oh, it's this. Oh, it's for years. The other thing that I thought was actually really well done too, and again, so real and true to life, is so everybody responds to trauma differently and different traumas differently. But then they also had to like come up against each other's trauma responses, right? So there's the conflict and the friction of whether intellectually I know or understand that you're having a trauma response, your behavior right now isn't working for me. And you're having to filter that through how I'm behaving, which may or may not be working for you. So I just thought there's so much complexity to that. And there's a beauty in how real the portrayal was without, I guess I feel like it would have been really easy to push it a little over the top, and then it would have been satirical or farcical or comical, but it wasn't. Like, it was really real and really grounded, recognizing that I mean, these responses were fair and appropriate, but they ran the gamut, and some of them were quite extreme.
I think too, it speaks to like what you were saying with generational trauma. These women have been gaslit for how long? And they were the older women who were taking that in all the way down to the younger generation. And I mean, in my job, we look at trauma response and trauma-informed practice and all of that every day. And to see the way that it was portrayed was very jarring, in the sense that it wasn't over dramatized. It wasn't, like you said, like blown out of proportion. These are actual real things. And it's interesting to look at how each woman was affected, coming from the same colony, coming from the same religious beliefs, coming from being raised under the same practices. These aren't women from all around the world who have had different experiences. These are women who live side by side together, and how they respond and how they grow. And I especially I'll be the one on this panel that does not remember any names, so I apologize in advance. But the young person who was using selective mutism as one of their trauma responses, and
Melvin.
Yeah. Are we looking at Melvin as someone who is going through a change emotionally, physically? Are they within a transgender or gender exploring sense? Or are they like many women that I've seen after the events like this, who create a look and a persona that would deter men from attacking them? I'm going to look more like a male person, so that they don't see me as a female that they can go after, or that they can kind of be attracted to. So that character really spoke to me in that sense, and looking through that lens of what is a trauma response and what is just their personality and who they are as a person. And having to fight through that in the most important parts, because I think we take that internalizing and that selective mutism as it can be seen as annoying to others. But you can't help it. Even when they're trying to tell the others something important, they can't. And it really spoke to me that they became almost a protector and a spokesperson for the children, because whether or not they had gone through the trauma themselves, it's slipping my mind, but to be able to be that protector and speak only to the innocent and speak only to the ones that they feel haven't been almost tainted like this.
Mm-hmm.
So even seeing the trauma response of the family, that the mom did not want to leave.
Mm.
She said, no, we are staying. This is where we are supposed to be. This is where we need to do our duty and stay with this. And her fear in that, but also that does happen in so many relationships. So I just think it was so, like you guys said, so well done in so many levels.
You've really got me thinking about Melvin's trauma response. So not only the selective mutism and the potential relationship to gender identity, but also that the safety of the children, right? So you think about, like, often part of our trauma responses, now we're hyper vigilant because there is what was previously unknown or unseen as risk. And so how do I protect myself? Right. And so sometimes in sexual trauma, that protection, anyways, it can take a whole bunch of forms. But for Melvin, part of that was, I'm going to be with the innocent population, and that's the children, because there isn't risk with the children there.
You're safe there and you're protected and you're accepted.
And yes. Yeah. And so it's kind of a neat dual relationship, but then I'm also protecting this safe group as well, right? So I get to be safe with them, and the exchange for that is I help keep them safe.
And we talk about even trauma, like arrested development. When we get there, like this young person may have had a trauma at a young age and feels arrested in that age and feels that they can only respond in that way. And that they're more understood by the children in that sense too. But it was just, I was really drawn to that character and really drawn, I mean, they were all amazing. But even at the end, when, I mean, we always say spoiler alerts, but at the end when the kids are able to be reunited because mom has let them come. And at the last minute, she makes that decision. And that was so huge in her own response as well.
No, I'm glad you brought up the transgender storyline, because I was very fascinated by Melvin's character as well. Because I think that a lot of people would automatically assume that Melvin is, you know, changing their appearance to kind of ward off that unwanted attention. But I think it was mentioned in the film that it wasn't because of that. Like, I think Melvin felt that outside of the abuse that they had been enduring. But I thought it was really fascinating that the women were very accepting of Melvin, especially in a very strict religious colony, that this was okay. They didn't question it really at all. And then at the end, somebody said Melvin, and they said, thank you for saying my name.
Yeah.
You know, like they felt seen finally. Because perhaps up until then it was like, you know,
humoring.
that's just Melvin. Yeah, humoring Melvin. That's just Melvin. That's what they do. But I guess maybe they've just realized that, you know, we get it now, and that's okay. You know, that's just who Melvin is. So I thought that was absolutely fascinating. But it's interesting that you were mentioning the dual purpose behind Melvin hanging out with the children all of the time. It's protecting the children, and maybe Melvin feels safe there. But it's also, I just bet that they've just all had their childhood stripped away, you know? And so I don't know. I guess it's just a matter of finding that safety and finding that joy wherever they can. You know what I mean?
Especially when they have little to no say in anything.
I know.
Yeah.
You're raised to be a wife there. You're raised to be a worker. You're raised to be a husband. You're not raised with any other intent but that.
So let's talk about the men for a moment, shall we? Which is clearly not what we're here to do. No, I'm joking. I found it quite fascinating that we barely saw the men. Really, the only time we saw the men, they all were looking down. So really, the only proper male face that we see is of August. And I thought that was an interesting choice. I think it was very respectful because it wasn't about the men. Even though the men were causing all of this, it wasn't about them.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that they didn't put any spotlight on these characters. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Except for the one who is August. And we have to talk about August, who, you know, we all love August, right? I have a couple of questions with August. My first one, which is going to be a difficult one. What makes August different from all of the other men?
You know, he went away and was educated. He experienced the world. He saw what was outside of what was in front of his face, and he came back with a different perspective. Had he not left, maybe he would have become just like the others.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think it is though that had the women? So it was very consistent with the book, right? In the book, really the only male that's identified is August, because the men are all away, right, during this period of time. The ones that were arrested, the other ones have taken all the money to go and get the perpetrators out of jail, basically. But I do wonder, we see that perspective of August because we're seeing it from the outside and we're seeing the whole story. But as the women having this experience, what do you think it was that for them made August safe so that he could be in that barn with them and taking the minutes for them? I mean, they didn't let him speak up. Steve kind of made that joke earlier, right? No, you're just taking minutes. Don't give us your opinion. But what do you think but they still, like, he was safe for them. So they invited him into that forum with them. And I don't know that I know the answer, like, to what it was that triggered that for them so that they could bring him in.
Sure. I think that's a very fascinating question, and I'm not sure either, but he clearly does have that very calm, safe demeanor to him. And I think there's definitely a level of trust because he's the teacher of a lot of their sons. And perhaps, you know, they've seen him work. But yeah, what was it that made them? Because he could have easily just said absolutely not and go and kind of told the men what they were planning, you know. And so not only what was it that made the women trust him, but what was it that made him kind of be aligned with the women as opposed to the men? You know, he's just a different kind of person.
He spoke up. He agreed. He
Sure.
openly agreed with the women. He is a teacher, but he's also, I feel like he was like Switzerland, you know, because he was a male, but he was a cultured and learned person, and he would be able to debate with them both sides. And he showed great respect towards them. He showed that he could, you know, sit and listen. And I don't know if it happened in the book, but I'm just thinking about the only other time we saw a male in this movie was when the one woman's husband comes back. And of course she's beaten very severely by this person, and we see the fear in them that they didn't have with what was his name? August. And you know what, to be honest, from what I saw, he appeared meek. He appeared not a smaller man, but like he was like a thinner guy. He was, you know, a bookish person. He wasn't the ones who went out and worked in the field and then came home and beat their wives. And he wasn't attached either. He had someone he was interested in, but he didn't have that wife and family and that buy-in that the others did, in my opinion.
There's also a reference to his mom being sort of questioning the doctrine of the community, questioning like the methods and kind of like the oppression within the community. And I remember thinking during the movie, I'm like, oh, I want a movie about his mom and her life after this, or like a book, because I was so fascinated by that, because it is kind of a quick mention, but you can tell just when they talk about his mom, there's so much weight given to her name or to her memory. And they sort of mentioned that she sort of questioned different thought processes in the community and questioned sort of like these like gender roles and the way people are kind of like the gender expectations, which you kind of have to wonder if that's part of the reason why he went away to school and got that education and was able to kind of explore the world and explore different perspectives, because he, as you mentioned, there's like that both nature and nurture at play there. Like he, personality wise, he seems to be like kind of a humble person and a calmer, kind of more internal sort of person. But then there's the nurture part where it seems like he was surrounded by people, or at least by his mom, who maybe encouraged or fostered that ability to be open-minded and to question things and do what you feel is right. So yeah, I think that there's a lot there, even though it's a brief mention. There's so much weight given to her memory that I feel like she might have played a big part in his life. And also it sounded like even the lives of the other women in the community, because they also kind of mention her with respect. So yeah, maybe one day we'll get a book about her.
I think you nailed it on the head. He had their trust because he had been vouched for by a woman that they highly respected.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And they'd watched him grow up with her. So she basically gave her a-okay for him to be there.
Definitely. And I think it's, it kind of makes sense in a way, like if even it, as someone mentioned earlier, like this film, it's almost timeless in the sense that it seems like it could be from so many different eras, and really it's set like not that long ago. But it's true even to this day, like when you're meeting someone new, especially if it's a man, sorry Steve, when that they have like if they have close relationships with the women in their family or female friends that are like, yeah, this guy's cool, like he can hang. You're like, okay, that's good, like I know that he's like a cool person. Whereas like if I don't know, sometimes it can be a little bit of a red flag if they don't have like healthy relationships with many women as well. So there's definitely, I think, something to that point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I totally
it is
agree.
unfortunately timeless, this piece, because even in today's society where, ideally on a daily basis, we don't necessarily struggle, at least, here we're probably privileged, more privileged than lots of women in the world. But we do still have to kind of trust our gut with a lot of people, because there are still, I'll say men mostly, who are overly aggressive and disrespectful. So it's interesting. It's definitely a sobering piece.
And I think we certainly live with a lot of privilege that other women may not have. But I think that underlying fear of physical and sexual violence never actually leaves a woman. And I remember the beginnings or middle of the Me Too movement, reading a story about a seminar, person delivering a seminar, and was really trying to get that point across that, like, as women, however subconscious it is, we always have that certain level of diligence around safety. And so just, took a piece of chart paper, drew a line down the middle, one side for men, one side for women, and said, okay, men, you are at the mall, you're the last one out, your car's in the parking lot. What do you think about as you walk to your car? And it was like, I walk to my car and unlock the car and get in. Like, it was a really one line, simple piece. And then he asked the women in the audience, what do you do? And the list of, make sure I park under a light, have my keys out, look around, like that. So, and we do it automatically, crossbody my purse so that somebody can't grab it, like every action. And in the story, like the men in the audience just never considered that somebody had to think that much about walking from, the door of a building to the door of their car. And so I think that that underlying piece around violence, safety, sexual violence, like it never really, we're brought up with it, we're taught it, but it never leaves us. Like that fear sits with us at some level, I feel like, all the time.
Even harder is the gaslighting. These
Yeah.
women and children knew something was happening to them. They knew, and it wasn't until they were caught that they were able to convince this whole community of women that it was ghosts or aliens or something else. And to have that trauma, that physical trauma against your body, and then having the mental trauma of being drugged, so having a very unclear understanding of what happened, and B, an entire colony of people telling you that it's in your head. To live with that for so many years, I think of the older women who were sitting in that barn who must have gone through it for so long and had so many, their sisters, their mothers, their the grandmothers have it all happen. And to think there were women that passed before them that never found out and never got that healing and never got that ability to make those walks. So it was just so powerful in so many ways when they walked away and they actually did it. You're not just doing it for yourself, you're doing it for everyone. And it broke me that they didn't take August. I'm gonna say that. But like I understood why they couldn't, but to see him and his trauma at being left behind, it's just so terrible.
I love
I
how
thought
you
August was, oh, sorry, Jolie.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna go on to the next point, so please feel free.
Oh, I was just going to mention, I love how you mentioned the ending. I'm sorry, spoiler alert. With August staying behind, and then in that moment, like, I don't know, as someone who read the book, you probably saw it coming, Miriam, but I was surprised in that moment when you see he, had a plan to, potentially take his own life. And I was surprised in that moment. And yet at the same time, also not surprised, because you can kind of understand like the trauma and the shame and the guilt, because ultimately, like, August is also a victim of the oppression that happens and the violence that happens in this community. He obviously does have sort of a place of privilege, like being a fellow, like, cis white male among the men in the community, and even just like structurally, you get a sense from the belief system that men are somewhat more revered than women in the community. So he does come from a place of privilege, but he is still a victim of the patriarchy and the oppression that happens there. And I really love that line. I forget which character says it to him, but it's like, you have an important job. Like, that's a lot on your shoulders, and we recognize that, but we need you to stand strong in that job, because just as the women make that choice, and I totally agree with you, Catherine, like when you see like all the carriages like pulling out, it's just, it like gives you shivers. And then so they're kind of breaking that chain of intergenerational trauma. He's also in a position to break that chain of generational trauma, in the position of being an educator and being a man in this community. So yeah, they both, he does have a tough job on his shoulders, but I think we come to love and respect August for taking like the path of goodness and justice, and even though it is tough and even though it is scary, and also admiring the women in the community for taking a step that is completely terrifying, especially for people that don't have the means to read or write. I would imagine don't have a lot of financial resources, and have very limited education to be able to take that step. It's truly like breaking a line in that chain of trauma going down all these generations. And it something you said kind of made me think, Jules, how you said earlier, like, we don't actually kind of up close and personal see any of the men in the community, only other than August. And I feel like that was such a deliberate choice, because it's sort of saying like it's not about men individually being bad or men individually are violent people. It's sort of like, no, like systematically men being put in positions of power and being unchallenged and living in a patriarchal society where everything like ladders up to that and supports that. It can be a very damaging system for everyone, for men and women as well. So I kind of feel like the fact that we often see them in groups. Like we see the
Mhm.
young boys, and we also see the older men walking together. Like they're always kind of shown collectively and kind of faceless. So it's sort of, I thought that was a very like interesting choice that Sarah Polley had to kind of show it more in like a collective or systemic like way of violence.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting too, because one of the differences between the book and the film is that in the book, August is the narrator.
Oh,
So it's
Fascinating.
the
Really?
story, yeah,
Fascinating.
this August is the narrator, and the story is told, basically it's him narrating via the minutes that he's taking of the meeting.
Wow.
Oh, that's such a different perspective. That's so
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
I like
but
that they went another way.
me too. I was gonna say, what I like about the film is that increases the women's power because they're telling their own story.
Something that I really loved, among the many things I loved about how this film was made, was how it allowed so many different women to vocalize like their perspectives and their experience. We have women of very different age ranges. Like, I think it's incredible that we see like the mothers and the grandmothers speaking about their experiences and bringing their perspectives. And then we see, and then on the other end, we see like the young kids who are running around and playing while this super harrowing conversation is taking place, and this super massive decision that will impact the rest of their life is happening, but they're still kids and they're still finding ways to find joy and play in the day, and fall down and sprain ankles and things like that, like just kids being kids amongst all of this all of these conversations happening among women of very different ages, very different perspectives. Yeah, I just think that's such a beauty of the film. And I'm sure if we like boiled it down to screen time, there are some that are maybe platformed more than others, but it did feel like all of them got equal kind of weight given to their role and into their character's perspective in a way.
Yeah, and each voice was valued. Like, I think that's one of the really powerful things about the women talking, is it was really clear, like from the get-go, okay, here's what we're here to figure out. We have a decision to make. We have 3 options. And despite some of the angrier voices being a little bit of like, how can any of you believe differently than I believe, and you need to align with me? But every voice was valued. So everybody got a chance to speak, and each was valued and weighed, as opposed to discarded. You're just angry, stop talking. You're just a kid, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, every voice was valued.
I love that. Even the vote at the beginning, I don't know if it was in the blurb, it was described as a radical act of democracy. And I love that description because, yeah, that it, from what we understand, or from what I understood in the movie, it sounded like a vote of that nature, where it's literally everyone is welcome to come and cast their vote, is maybe not the norm in that community. And the fact that it literally is made like front and center here. We have a whole group of people that don't necessarily even have the tools to read and write, and they were still able to find a way to make a democratic process and make a way that everyone could vote and understand the choices and pick which one they felt most aligned with. Like, it really is a radical act of democracy as the blurb said. I love that description.
Even the young people were able to vote. You could see that the children were voting themselves as well, and that was so powerful too, because they're given voices that their mothers were not given.
And they're given that voice because, unfortunately, even the children are experiencing this trauma.
Exactly.
So they learned to vote. Absolutely. Every female voice was important in that moment. And not just the ones who were angry and wanting to leave, wanting to fight, wanting to become murderers because of this. People like Frances McDormand, who were saying, want less. Just like, this is just the life, and that's just how it is. Want less. And they knew, even though this is all that they know, they knew fundamentally that it was wrong. They called it an act of wild female imagination film. So I thought that was absolutely fascinating. Yeah, wow. Truly, it is such a heavy topic, and there really is a lot to unpack. Right off the bat, I went into watching this film without knowing very much about it. I hadn't read the book, um, and so the very first scene, um, where I believe it's Rooney Mara, you see that she wakes up and she's bruised, and she calls for her mother. And she says, I actually had to rewind it because she says it very softly, very calmly. She says, again.
Mhm.
Mm.
So it's just right off the bat, you're like, wait, is this what I think it is? Like, is this what's happening? Okay. Like, because I didn't really know much about the film going into it, I
Mm.
had to kind of do a double take. Um, so it's yeah, it's an absolutely unbelievable story. And you could very easily get emotional about this one.
Mhm.
Let's go back to August for one moment. And it kind of makes a little bit more sense now that you've discussed the book and how the book is based more from August's point of view, from the minutes that he was taking at the meeting. But why do you think the women felt it necessary to have minutes for this meeting? Simply because they can't read or write. And at the end of the film, they don't take the minutes with them, they leave it with August. Why were the minutes so important in this situation?
It's their history books. We won't be able to read them, but our children will. I believe that is said in that, and even maybe they leave them for the men and for the boys.
Mhm.
They'll carry that with them. They'll have their children write their story for them. But I feel like there's like twofold. There's a visual. There's this amazing, almost like rebellion that they're writing stuff down, because even if it's through another person, because they've never been able to do that. They've never, even when they say that they're looking through the writing and asking, what does this say, or what did you put here, it's that act of independence, and it's that act of creating a history and a log for those that come after them. And I think that we've been doing that since hieroglyphics and cave drawings, in the sense that for the dawn of time, we wanted our history recorded, and theirs is just as deserving.
Yeah, in the
It's
world
the
of work, there's
important
that.
work. That's the
Mhm.
Yeah.
important work that Claire Foy said that August needed to do.
Yes.
Teach this to our sons that aren't coming
Mhm.
with us. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, in the world of work, there's that little kind of rule that, if it isn't written down, it didn't happen.
Mhm.
So I think there's a little bit of that too, right? Is they
The
didn't
paper
want
trails.
right, but they also didn't want any lack of clarity on, like, the men come back and the community is abandoned. And I think part of it was them wanting to be very clear that this was an intentional action. It was based on a consensus driven decision making. And this is the consequence of what has happened. And this is the action we've taken as a result.
That makes so
And it's
much
like,
sense too, because you're saying, like, they could say, like, what they've been gaslighting with all the women, like, it's all in your head, you're just being crazy, this and this and this. That, leaving that there, is basically a giant middle finger, and like, we did this, we're doing this, and you're not necessary.
yeah. And you will no longer be able to say the reasons were different than what our reasons actually are.
Mhm.
I love that the whole thing is kind of um, a lesson, and also to kind of improve the lives of the next generation. One of the women said, um, is this how we want to teach our daughters to defend themselves? Do you know what I mean? Like that, like, not only was it a massive decision for them in that moment, but it's a decision for generations to come, because we've already seen that this trauma has gone through these generations, and it's going to continue to happen because their sons are being taught that this
Mhm.
is normal. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
so it was a big decision, and I think that, yeah, you're right. It is certainly their history books. It has to be.
You do bring up an interesting point, Julie, that I kind of played around with in my head little bit now. In all fairness, I'm also on a policy committee, and we were talking about ages in policy committee too, so there's a bit of overlap here. But that whole discussion they had around which children they take with them. No, we can't take the 14-year-old boys. Okay, we can take the 13-year-old boys, but what about like just figuring out that arbitrary line of, yes, you get to come with us, you're still counted as innocent and safe, and no, you're officially counted in the men category, and so you can't. And that whole debate and discussion they just had around like which boys can we take with us, and which have to stay behind. Like I just found super fascinating.
Weirdly, it reminded me of my time growing up in the Catholic Church, where if you were under 12, you didn't, it's this weird rule where if you were under 12 and you passed away, say as a child, and you weren't baptized, you were instantly going to heaven because you were still pure and innocent. And then anything after 12 is seen as becoming like a man and becoming I don't know why it brought back that religious rhetoric in my
yeah, but it makes me wonder, like, why 12? What is it about 12 to 13 that makes that the line, right? Yeah.
Was it based on their beliefs, or was it based on like what their malleability and like their minds as well? I wanted to mention with the history books too, I love that it wasn't just the minutes. They had the young girls sit there and sketch everything that happened. So not only did they have the minutes, they had a visual log as well of who they were and what they were doing and what was happening at that time.
The whole thing really is very groundbreaking and powerful, and not just from the perspective of the people in this colony, but for women in general. What I really loved is when August taught Rooney Mara's character how to do the, was it called galactic navigation? Is that what it was called? But then when she went and taught that to the other women, cinematically, they show a shot of just the fists in the sky, just the fists of all the women in the sky. And I thought that was like it was just so powerful. And then when you think about the final scene, not of the baby, but them leaving the town, it, to me, it could have felt very sad, like they were giving up, but it was such a powerful scene. It was almost like a parade, like a protest. I thought it was incredibly well done.
And the amount of them that were there too. It wasn't just, and they were not doing this in the middle of the night under the cover of darkness and hiding. They were standing very tall and in the middle of the, as the sun came up, but it was not done in a way that was hidden or scared. They knew what they were doing. They had everything together and they were going.
I still think it was a little bit scared, but I think that fear was wise, right?
Yeah.
Like they needed to go before the men came back. They knew that had to happen, right? Like if they were leaving, they had to leave before the men came back.
I just love that it was light out. I don't know why. I just loved that procession happened, A, at the dawning of a new day, and B, not hidden.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that the men were not there, you're right, but like it was done like, it's time, we're going, and this is when we're doing it.
But they were not far off. I mean, we know that
they could have come in.
I think it was Jessie Buckley's husband was at home. He had just beaten her.
Yeah.
So it's I thought it was also very fascinating to see how many there were, because certainly there's only a handful of them in the barn, and they all got a chance to vote, but they're not all necessarily part of the logistic discussion. So seeing them all, and then you're right, when Frances McDormand's daughters came out and were reunited with their friends, I thought that was I found her character very interesting. Actually, just in general, you would assume that Frances would be in more of the movie. She was in such a sliver of it, but her I think her character was really important because it showed a little bit more of the older, not necessarily the older generation, but the people who are too scared to run, or who don't see any sort of life outside of that colony. And I guess it might be a good time to talk a little bit more about the religious aspect of the film and forgiveness. Forgiveness, I think, is a big thing here, because obviously, I mean, some of the women were forgiving the men simply because that's kind of what they had to do. This is just how they had to live, and they didn't
That's
think
how
that
you
they
get
had
to
a choice.
heaven.
Certainly, yes. So that's the thing. The forgiveness is how you get into the kingdom of heaven. And then if you're disobeying or even having these thoughts of leaving or fighting, you're kind of out. You know what I mean? There was one amazing quote: is forgiveness that's forced upon us true forgiveness?
I loved that quote. It really
Yeah.
stuck out.
So I'd love to hear what you guys think about that.
I think it's also interesting in that it just speaks to the way that women are raised. And I think probably even more so in this kind of community, right? Like, and I think about, what's the expression from the
Keep sweet.
yes. How did you know that's what I was thinking about?
It was exactly what I was thinking too. Keep sweet.
Yeah, like it's just like women are raised to not take up space, to not be argumentative, to not disagree, to always be accommodating, to right. And so part of that, like, well, you have to forgive because that's just what you do, and that's how you keep sweet, and that's like it's just so religion aside, it's so in keeping with. And then I think religion becomes the, I don't know, the extra pound that's put on that says here's the 10 more reasons why this has to be the way that you behave and interact. Yeah, and I'm with you too. That line was just so powerful. Like, if you're telling me I have to, and I do it because you're telling me I have to, but I don't really mean it, then is it really what it is?
It's so funny because we talk about stuff like that even in our schools today. Like with my kids, I just had a conversation today that said, there was an argument between two students and they got angry at each other, and then we were talking it out and we were working through it. And I said to them, I am never going to force you to apologize because I don't believe in forced apologies because they're not real apologies. You need to take time and you need to think about this. And I strongly encourage you, but I'm never going to force someone to say you need to say sorry because it's not real. You're just being, and it's just like that forgiveness thing. Like, is forgiveness really forgiveness if you're forced to it? If the eternal life is held over your head, and it isn't.
Yeah, it isn't. It's true that is not the not the keys to the kingdom. But I do, the one counter argument I'll make, I think, so not that I believe forgiveness should be forced. I think the power in forgiveness, though, is for the person doing the forgiving, not for the person being forgiven. And I've heard this expression and I use it a lot, but I love it, is that when you choose not to forgive somebody, or when you choose to hold a grudge, or when you choose to like hold that enmity within you, it's like you drink the poison and you're expecting the other person to die.
Yeah.
Like the negative effects are with you, not with the person who wronged you. And so I think that would just be the counter argument for forgiveness, is no, it shouldn't be forced upon you, but the benefits and the value of it are for you, not for the person you're forgiving.
And I feel like that goes exactly with what they did. It's the whole old adage, I'll forgive, but I never forget. You're not holding on to that grudge, like you're forgiving that person and releasing that poison, but you're not staying around. You're going to take that with you, and you're going to take that learning with you, I think.
Yeah, I think there's so much about like the discussion around forgiveness, and even tying to, as you mentioned, them like leaving during the day, like it was a pragmatic and strategic time to leave, that they knew that they obviously wanted to avoid further violence and further oppression by leaving before the men came back, but going at the start of the day is a pragmatic choice. But there's also, I think, it just like storytelling wise, like it sort of shows that this was such an intentional decision, just as forgiveness should be like an intentional thing that you process and you work through and you intentionally give, as opposed to having it be sort of forced upon you, or indirectly forced upon you by saying, well, you know what, you're not going to be absolved, you're not going to reach heaven if you don't, you know what I mean? It's still sort of forcing someone's hand in a way, as opposed to forgiveness being an act of intention and a true like embodied act. So yeah, I think that was such an interesting thing. And like you said, Catherine, that adage, it definitely, I thought it fits quite a lot with this, because they are forgiving in a way, like they're not they're not even seeking further action or any like judicial action against these people who have very much wronged them and have wronged them many a time. But they're saying, okay, I can forgive that, but for the sake of my safety and for the sake of my peace and the next generation's safety and peace, I'm going to remove myself from this abusive situation and try to intentionally start a new way of life. Yeah, I think the more I think about this movie, the more I love it.
I think I have to watch it again.
Me too. I was just thinking the
Yeah.
same thing.
There's just too many. I mean, it is obviously a very serious and heavy movie, but there's just so many, like I said, good quotes, good one-liners, good lessons. Anyway, yeah, I definitely think it's worth
I feel like
watching.
you could sit and watch it again and look at a different character each time you watch it.
Yes, that's a
Like, even
fascinating idea.
when I think about the one young person, the character that we were talking about, the transgendered young person, their name
Melvin.
Melvin. Even looking at that, like as I started, I was like, is this a trauma response? Is this their gender identity? Is this what's happening here? What's going on with that selective mutism in the kids? When you were talking about them being in the field and playing with all of the young children, it threw me right back into one of the books that put me into the career that I am today, which was Catcher in the Rye. And maintaining that innocence, running back and forth across the field. The kids couldn't see the ledge that they were going to fall off into, which was their loss of innocence. But Melvin's in that field with them doing that. But I really think you could take a look at each character every time you watch this and see and learn something new.
Yeah, because the cast was really like a chorus. It wasn't like a couple of main players and more some kind of background singers. No, it was about all of them combined. I think that they represented that really well. In an effort to kind of move the discussion toward moving forward, you can't really talk about moving forward without talking about Ruth and Cheryl, the horse duo. I thought it was so fascinating that these like deep, meaningful life lessons were from these horses. I thought it was so fascinating. If you want the path to stay straight, you have to look forward. Don't look right in front of you. Things like that. I mean, I love Ruth and Cheryl. I want more of their lessons in my life.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I forgot about Ruth and Cheryl. How did I forget about Ruth and Cheryl?
And even when you first said it, I was like, there were characters named Ruth and Cheryl. Oh, right, the horses.
When she first said, like, when I think we hear them say their names a couple of times before we actually get the flashback scene, and I kept thinking, like, Ruth and Cheryl, like, who are these ladies? Like, I thought they were like other humans in the community. And then when they showed they were horses, I'm like, oh my god, that's amazing. But yeah, I thought it was just so, like you said, Jules, it was so beautiful because it was so impactful. Impactive. I don't think impactive is a word. It was so impactful in how natural it was, kind of just showing like just in it was so simplistic and natural, these lessons that could be extrapolated from these situations she's seen or observed her horses experiencing. Like there's just, and the way that she spoke about them was so loving. Like it was such a loving, caring tone. Yeah, right. Like it truly, like those I found were some of the most like, I don't want to say heartwarming in like a diminutive way, but like there was something so beautiful in the love and care in which she spoke about Ruth and Cheryl. And you can just see the respect that she has for them as fellow living creatures. She never kind of speaks about them in a dismissive sense, or all their animals, they're beasts or whatever, but she speaks about them as being their own sentient beings with their own kind of reactions to the world around them. So yeah, there was just something so beautiful about those moments.
And it was, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Miriam, go.
All I was going to say is it's also interesting that the husband coming back and their imminent departure and sale became the catalyst for we can't keep talking, we have to act now. Like it was an interesting.
That's such a good point. I forgot about that, but yeah, like that was it. You could kind of see for that lady who owned Ruth and Cheryl, like that was a safe space to her. Like those two horses were family to her. They were a safe connection that she had, and to have that be so threatened in such a like crude way, it was clearly like, okay, no, this is never going to change. And like they're seeing any way that they can, this group can exert power, they're going to take it, kind of thing.
It goes to show too, like it's just like these subtle I just think she did this movie so well on so many different levels. But even with that, like learning in the everyday moments, learning to release control, to release fear, and to let yourself trust yourself and trust and I will say people, but obviously they were horses. Like those horses are powerful beings. They could throw her, they could kill her. And so it's natural to be anxious and weaving and making that extra looking for the potholes ahead of the road that are going to swerve them off, but staying in a controlled manner that also releases it at the same time, and learning that in the everyday, that these women were so much further ahead than they even knew they were or thought they were.
I honestly, I loved the fact that we were getting these profound lessons from those simple everyday things, because these women are not stereotypically educated, very sheltered, very influenced by the colony that they live in. So they are taking these kind of more simple everyday actions and learning from them. And I think that it's very inspiring, actually, because you can learn from anything, and you can take a lesson from anything, and really just kind of humble yourself, and be open to receiving those words of wisdom, I guess you could say.
It's sorry.
No, go for it.
Open to being led to what you need to learn.
Love that. Led. So good. So
Right?
good.
Yeah. I was just gonna, like, you really got me thinking, Julie, about like depriving women of education, which happens all over the world, is a very intentional act of oppression. And so they're not educated, they can't read or write, they probably don't have their own money, right? They don't have the right to make their own decisions in this particular community. And despite they've been, experienced gaslighting for in the real world events, it was 5 years. So I don't know if the movie was supposed to be the same period of time, but for a pretty extended period of time. And yet I guess the beauty of it is you can't hold us down, like no matter how hard you try. Okay, so I don't have book learning, but look at everything, the wisdom that I had in just interacting with my horses, and the wisdom that I could then bring to my community of women that we could all learn from and take action on. Like it just hit me how powerful that is, despite like the layers of oppressive experiences and intentional oppressive actions. The spirit of these women and their ability to overcome that wasn't broken.
And how you're right, like how incredibly respected and smart they are. Like what you said, they all got a chance to vote, but they had the 3 families that they believed were going to be their leader. And for them to be able to do this over, I believe it was one night, and to rally all of the women and gather what they needed. They didn't do this like, I want to say half-assed, but like they didn't do this half-assed. This was planned, this was orchestrated, and they knew what they needed, they knew how much they needed it. These women had so much power in them, and really could have run those men off of the colony if they had come down to it, if it came down to that. But the power that you hold when you allow yourself to not be afraid to use that, and to have the support of the women around you or the people that you surround yourself with, the amount of respect and power and emotion that went into all of it was just so well done. And so it was so well done.
Miriam, Catherine, I just want to snaps. Like there's like multiple mic drop moments in the last 2 minutes. So like I am so just, my heart is full from this conversation. I feel like I'm gonna take so much away from this conversation. But yeah, I love like in everything that you've said, like something that stood out to me too, which I think connects to you both as well, is like the importance of community care. And like as you said, like there's layers of oppression here, and yet there's this community is still able to survive and indeed hopefully thrive through intentional community care. And yeah, like that's, you just see community care kind of shown in so many different ways in the film, like whether it's through having like a completely open vote and having everyone vote, having like nominated families that are like intentionally nominated families who are making these decisions and handling like almost like a steering committee, handling like the logistics, and then even like in a very pragmatic sense, like getting the like the carriages going, like people are kind of just like rushing out with whatever supplies they have. People are sharing supplies, people are welcoming family members who maybe for example, like Frances McDormand's family, who Frances McDormand's character sort of like resigned herself to this and maybe doesn't support her family going away, but these folks chose to go, and they're welcomed and willingly like accepted by the crowd of people leaving. Like I think there's just so much about community care in this film that's so important. And yeah, like even amidst oppressive forces, it's sort of like if there is active and intentional community care, people can still rise above that and can still find ways to like take action in their own lives.
It reminds me of what's going on around the world and in Iran even right now, with the women who are banding together and these young people who are coming together on TikTok and making these outward protests and supporting each other all over the world, even as we're living in it right now. They have the community. If you have the community, like they say, it takes a village, but like if you have the community and you have the want and the drive, these women, like the women of Iran, the young people out there right now, they are crushing it. And they are like these women in the barn, and they're done. And it's amazing to see that it speaks, like you said, it's a generational movie that could speak for so many.
Yeah, and having that like strength in numbers, not even just in like a physical force way, but even just like from a mental perspective, like knowing I can fall upon my community and I know that they will validate my perspective on this, and they'll validate the actions I'm taking for my own peace or my own safety. Yeah, just like knowing that you have that like numbers of people supporting you and validating that, I think can be so empowering.
Which is why that written history was so important too.
Absolutely.
It'll never happen again.
And say what you want about TikTok, right? You know, everybody's got their own opinions, but what they're doing is exactly what the women did in this film, which is using what they have. Do you know what I mean? Using what they know to make a difference.
Exactly.
So it's fascinating. Absolutely.
And getting the word out that you're not alone. Like even if you think of the stuff that was happening in Ukraine, like stuff you would never know about that was happening, it's voices are being lifted everywhere, and this movie is an excellent representation of that.
Fantastic. Well, I'm pretty sure I already know the answer, but I think I have to ask, screen it or skip it. Screen it or skip it.
Screen it.
I think it's important to know, if you're going to watch this movie, that there is if you have your own trauma that you're carrying, to be aware that there is trauma in this. There is very charged topics that will bring stuff up for you maybe that you wouldn't even think of until you watch it. But I will say that the actors and everyone involved in this movie have taken that with such care and humility, and have brought it in a sense that it is not sensationalized, it is not graphic, it is not
It's not exploitative.
It's not exploitative.
Yeah.
Thank you. That is exactly what I was thinking. There is trauma, there is real feelings that will be felt, and you need to just remember to have self-care if you're going into it. But if you can, I would 100% screen it.
Such a good trigger warning, Catherine. Such a good call out.
Yeah. And yeah, no, I'm glad that and both of you said that at different points. Like, yeah, that is, I couldn't even articulate it till now, but yeah, it doesn't feel exploitative, like a lot of films where you feel they're sort of cashing in on real trauma, real people's lived experiences for the views, for the awards, for the reactions. But this film, to me, it seemed like it was very intentionally handled with compassion and intentionally handled with care. I definitely screen it. If you can watch it, yeah, definitely, I think it's a good call, Catherine, that it's a film that I think benefits being in a certain mindset. And for certain people, it may not be like healthy or good for them to watch at that particular time. But if someone feels open to it or capable of processing it at that time, definitely screen it. I myself had been trying to go see it in theaters since TIFF, and it just like never worked with my work
I
schedule.
did too.
Right? Oh, and I really wanted to go and like support it in theaters. I ended up renting it on the Cineplex website, right? And you know what? I still wish I could see it in theaters, and if it ever comes back to theaters, I will definitely go. I will make a point. But I I quite liked like when I rented it from the Cineplex website and watching it at home. Like, you know, I turned all the lights off. I made sure, okay, I'm not doing anything else for the rest of the night. I want to fully process and be present for this film. So I think whether it's in a theater or if it's at home, just kind of give yourself a space that you can feel like peaceful in and feel that you can kind of give yourself the time to process it and take it. Yeah. But
That's another really, really great call out. I also watched it at home and not in theaters, but that was a safer space for me to watch it because the content is quite charged. And so I appreciated that I didn't have to handle or experience the energy of the people around me in my own processing of it, or be concerned about the energy I was giving off
right.
in watching it too. So actually, and I'm a very extroverted person, but I was really happy that I watched it by myself.
I think that's very smart of you to kind of, especially with films that are so sensitive, think about where you're going to watch it, how you're going to watch it, when you're going to watch it. I think that's very important. Absolutely. And that's the thing. I completely agree. I think this is a fantastic and very important story to be told and to hear and to learn from. I think that it was done very respectfully. I really appreciate that it wasn't kind of, they didn't put that Hollywood flair on it. You know what I mean? It was very real. And I appreciated that they showed the different responses of all the different women, how they all coped with it or didn't cope with it. So that was very appreciated. I thought it was fantastic, and I think that you should watch it. Steve, would you like a go at it, or do you, like, I don't know if you want me to specifically
You have permission
highlight
to
the male
speak.
perspective, or if you want to stay in the background a little bit.
What are you asking? I'm not sure.
What do you think about it as a guy, though? Like, from a male perspective, a cis white hetero male, like, what did you think about it? Honestly, not even being silly.
I thought it was brilliant. And you guys, honestly, me sitting to the sidelines on this one, I'm so glad. Like, this is my role here was to listen. I wanted to listen. I wanted. Thank you, Julie, for hosting, and thank you all for doing this, because I thought the film was excellent. I'm not sure I trust August.
I did that sometimes too. I was like, but then I came around.
I mentioned this to Steve. I said, I'm concerned about August's emotions because I don't know. Is he emotional because he's in love with this woman and he's upset that she's leaving? There was certainly a level of guilt to August, and I didn't know if the guilt was on behalf of, all of the males in the colony, or if perhaps he had participated in some of these actions in the past because that's what he had been taught to do. There were definitely parts of me that assumed that the Hollywood flair would come out and they would say that, Ola is pregnant with August's baby. You know what I mean?
Surprise!
Yeah.
So from
Like-
the book, which I don't know was as articulated in the film, August's family was excommunicated and he just recently came back.
Yeah.
So he doesn't fit the timeline of having even been there when
Sure.
this was happening. Yeah.
Sure. Sorry, Steve. I hijacked your your thought there.
No, it's funny what you say there. I said I think it's yes to both questions. I think and as a man, I think that many men carry shame with them and are looking for ways to be better, or at least I hope they are. And I felt August may have been an example of that. I don't know what I can't speak to whether or not he did anything, but I think every man has a certain, myself included, has a certain level of toxicity within us that we're, God willing, trying to work out. And so this is a sort of film that, for me, is about listening more than speaking about, which is why I've been so thrilled to have you four here, just listening to the four of you, because this is a very multi-layered story, and at different points of the film I agreed with everybody. And
It's funny, I was just looking at the screen about how long you've known each of us.
On the screen?
Like,
is it on our screen?
I'm just looking at the women that are here and how long you've known.
I'm like, does it come up in the corner? Wait.
No. But just like, us as individuals and as a collective, and it's pretty interesting. That's pretty cool to be like, I don't know, for you to have us all together like this, to be able to talk and share about it.
I consider it a privilege that you all have stuck with me. I'm not gonna lie.
You're stuck with us, Steve. You can't get rid of us that easily.
We haven't left you in a barn somewhere.
That's the real secret to women talking. They were ditching August. That's what. No, stay here and teach them. That's what you should do.
Yeah.
Just stay here, August. Just right there.
What's that over there, August?
I have to say, I do, when you said I don't know if I trust August, because I hadn't necessarily I never really, I don't think I had a point where I was like, I don't trust you, like there's gonna be a heel turn here at some point. But I think you raised a good point that he is someone that is probably carries some shame or carries some sort of turmoil within themselves, just as anyone who benefits from an oppressive system does. Any person, whether it's by gender or race, by economic class, what have you, if you benefit from a certain system that oppresses others and kind of hinges on the oppression of others, you likely carry shame and or some sort of problematic or toxic views. That's how these systems stay alive. And I think that with August, I definitely agree. I felt like there was like an element in him that, felt shame, whether it's from like an individual personal sense or more from like a collective sense of, you know, benefiting from this oppressive system, or, you know, returning to an oppressive system where he knows he receives benefit from it. Yet he does try, I think, to do his best and tries to be an ally, and to support the women in their in finding their safety and in finding their peace. And I actually was impressed in Miriam. I don't know if it was like this in the book, but I was impressed by how the film handled his like romantic feelings for Rooney Mara's character, because he is human. Like he does love this character, but I think very intentionally, or like knows, if I were to be too open about that, or if I were to try and enforce that, she might stay here in a place that's clearly an unsafe place, in a place where she has experienced a lot of trauma. And so instead, he sort of intentionally kind of is like, okay, I just need to process my own stuff and not hold her back.
Yeah.
So I was kind of happy with how they handled August. Like, he was human, but he was trying his best and trying to be better, I think, than the people that came before him. But I don't know if it was like that in the book.
Why did he come back?
That was consistent. I don't know, that's not really called out, but it's but
maybe to teach, maybe he thought he would make a difference.
Maybe that's what I thought too. I was like, maybe but imagine coming back to that. You're like, hey guys, I'm back. They're like, great, start taking notes, we're out of here.
So there's been some changes while you were away.
Poor guy.
Yeah.
I like why he's crying at the end. He's like, I just came back.
Yeah.
I just got here.
I'm surprised he didn't try to go with them. I honestly thought he would try, but I think he really understood his place.
I think that's it.
Remember, but I feel like in the book they I don't know why I think this is true. Don't quote me on it. I read the book first. But I feel like he did. Or if he didn't, then
the girls,
right? Yeah.
Missed opportunity.
I don't know why I feel like maybe this was just me romanticizing the ending. Like, he does end up with Ona, and they raise her child, who's the product of rape, together. Like, I don't know why. Maybe I'm romanticizing it, but I feel I'm going to Google the book summary and see if I'm remembering it correctly or not.
Because I was like, if you take him with you, you have education for your girls. You have a male role model for the young boys that are
positive role model. Yeah.
Someone who can educate the younger boys coming up. I mean, women can do it themselves, whatever. But like, if you're going in with, I guess they could teach themselves.
That's a good point. I never actually thought about the benefits of if they brought him along. I kind of always was very much like, oh yeah, it makes sense for him to stay because he can be a positive like actor of change and implement change in the community. But yeah, that you raised a really good point, that they're like, if he had gone with him, he could have done a lot of good. Sorry, Steve, did you have your hand?
Yes, Steve.
I have my hand up.
You in the back row.
Because here's the flip side of that is y'all aren't thinking what's going to happen to August when they leave him behind.
Well, that's that I did.
No, but I mean,
because he was there and you're the only one.
No, they do leave him behind, even in the book. I guess I just I romanticize the idea that
he's dead.
No, that's what I mean. If this system is so toxic that the men are drugging the women and having their way with them, and he gets left behind to be an agent of change, which I'm all for, and I saw that this is an incredible testament to the idea of enacting that. Do the rest of the men want change?
No, he's certainly not safe.
No, he's not safe at all. And he took the minutes. He can't even say they overpowered me. Like, they could have taken, and that's why when he was sobbing and he had the gun, I just was like, I was almost angry in that moment. Where like, why aren't you taking this person with you? He has paid his penance. He's done what he needed to do, and you're doing this to his mother now. Like, and so there was this thing where I'm like, there's so many benefits to taking this guy with you. A, you're probably saving his life. B, he can educate and be a role model. And maybe increase the population a little bit when you get down to it. Like,
Sister wives.
Sister wives, hello. But
Wow.
I understood, like, okay, the women can figure it out. They figured all this out. They can figure out how to read and write and do what they need to do, and they can raise their boys the way they want to be raised in a matriarchal society. But this guy is dead. So I hope, in my mind, at the end of the movie, August scampers off and goes back to whatever life he had before he came here. Like, you know.
Well, and interesting, the author, Miriam Taves, like, she grew up in a Mennonite community and considers herself a secular Mennonite. So one of the comments about her writing the novel is like, who better to write about the community than somebody who came from it?
Yeah.
It is a fictionalized account based on true events, but who better to kind of have the pulse on what that could have looked like?
The Manitoba colony in Bolivia. That's what it.
Yeah, and it was 2005 to 2009, and it was over 151 women.
That's
Wow.
like when you think
those
of how recent that is.
Yeah.
Like, it's and how long, like 4 years, and that's the documented time of that.
I was just gonna say,
specific
who's to
thing.
say?
Like, I'm sure other
Yeah.
types of abuse or oppression had been happening for
Because
much
who's
longer
teaching
than
these
that.
men
Yeah.
to do this?
Oh, it doesn't just happen overnight.
No,
Yeah.
this was going on for way longer, and they were using was it cow
Tranquilizers?
tranquilizers?
Yeah. And animal, horse tranquilizer, cow tranquilizer, like animal. Yeah.
I wonder what the lasting health benefit, not benefits, the opposite
side
of
effects.
Thank you. Of
Ever
inducing
since I
all of that
started
for
using
years.
horse tranquilizer, I've noticed an increase in my strength, my ability to walk straight, and my hair has never been shinier.
My teeth look fantastic.
Yeah, they're 10 sizes too big for my mouth.
But yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's true. Like, no, but no, it's such a fair call out too, though, right? Like in the film, the Ruth, the horse mistress, her teeth her teeth were knocked out, right, from the violence, and so she had like fake teeth she had to put in. But
they were hurting her.
Yeah, there must have been some very serious, just physiological side effects.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, look at it was Jessie Buckley's character who was severely abused the night before they left. You can't endure that daily, weekly, and just be okay. These women will be physically traumatized for forever.
Yeah.
And as we know, the body holds trauma. So these issues, cancers, like organ issues, diabetes, all of these things can be produced from that. They can be produced obviously naturally, but it's crazy.
It's funny that you mentioned that, Catherine, because I was just going to say, like, intergenerational trauma can exist both in like a mental and emotional standpoint, but also from a physical standpoint, because if someone who has been severely abused, they likely will have some sort of physical repercussions from that, which then in turn affects their ability to parent their children and perhaps provide for their children. And that just kind of gets passed down and passed down. And yeah, the physiological impacts as well. Like you said, the body holds trauma. That there was a book by Gabor Mate that I read recently, and they were finding statistically significant correlations between people who had, experienced either long-term like abuse or long-term stress induced by something in their life, or had experienced it at a very young age, like a very impactful incident at a very young age. There's like a significant correlation to things like multiple sclerosis, ALS, all sorts of these sort of physiological illnesses. Any type of trauma or abuse touches so many aspects of a person's life and the following generations as well. So even thinking of that real the real group of people, it weighs your heart to think of how long had it been going on before someone like we only know recorded for those 4 years. How long wasn't it recorded?
Yeah.
And then we found that, and how long are these impacts going to last, going forward? So it's these movies or this movie or in this book are so important because it is putting these words to page or putting these words on screen and making it real for people, and hopefully has some sort of impact in breaking that, like that long form chain.
Yeah.
If you ever want to read a book that's good, it's called The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah.
I've been
I
meaning
was
to
thinking
read
about that
that.
one too.
It's an
Gabor
excellent one.
Mate, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I could talk about this all night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a you reminded me too of there's a childhood trauma index, and I can't remember what it's called, but there's like 5 or 6 questions, and the more you answer yes to,
Yeah.
the more like the barriers to your thriving past childhood.
We do that at work.
Yeah, what's it called, Catherine?
It literally, I feel like, is like your trauma
It's like
index.
ATS, something.
Yes. Oh my God, all that's coming to me now is ALS. That is not what it is. But it's if you answer yes to more than a certain amount of questions that you've probably gone through. And I was like, oh crap, because you do it for yourself and it's like, oh Lord.
Yeah.
But no, this was so good. Remember I told you guys from Scream about the rats with that like smell?
Ace. It's
Ace.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah.
Do you remember that, Steve? I was telling you about the rats and the smelling of the
That's right. We were talking about
Oh,
that.
I was like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about rats?
I
Yeah,
need
you're
this
right.
backstory. What is
So-
about the rat?
In the Scream
It's
podcast.
actually about trauma and generational trauma in the body, because they had these male rats that they kept in a lab and they were testing trauma responses and body response, but they would spray this like perfume type rose kind of smell into the male rat's cage and then electrocute them so that they would get conditioned to, whenever they smelt it, they became highly aroused and anxious because they were expecting that response. And then they put them with female rats that hadn't had that happen to them. They had babies, and the reaction to the scent, the trauma response to the scent, was seen in both the babies of those rats and the grandbabies of those rats. And they had never been electrocuted even like from birth. So that so they were like, the generational trauma effect on your physiologically and psychologically is there. Like, your grandfather was shocked by this smell, and now you have a much more subdued as it got lower down, but you still have this reaction to it.
That's so wild. It's so interesting.
Oh, nuts.
Yeah.
That came from our Scream 6.
Never in my life would I think that we would have some sort of connection between the two. Wow. That's really fascinating.
Double feature.
It came up. Maybe I think it was because we were talking about generational trauma with Billy Loomis.
Yeah, absolutely. No, honestly, I feel like we could continue to sit here for hours and unravel this piece. There's so much to it, and I think that's really the beauty of it as well. I think this is probably a good place to wrap up, though. Everybody, thank you so much. What an incredible conversation. This has been amazing. Again, Steve, Kat, Miriam, Jolie, thank you so much. And I gotta say it, we started the conversation. This is Screamfish.